These images will change everything you thought you knew about America. Welcome back to Black History in Photos, where we bring you the real, unsanitized photos America doesn't want you to see. Please subscribe to us and leave a like. This tells the algorithm we are building a great movement. What you're about to witness isn't just history. It's trauma. It's the truth they've been hiding from you your entire life. These 20 photographs document the horrors our ancestors endured. And I'm warning you right now, some of these images are going to shake you to your core. But we need to see them. We need to remember. We need to make sure this never happens again. Number 20. The whipped back of Gordon. This photograph from April 1863, preserved in the National Archives, shows the scarred back of Gordon, an enslaved man who escaped from a Louisiana plantation. This image, known as the scourged back, became one of the most powerful pieces of abolitionist propaganda during the Civil War. Look at his back. Those aren't just scars. Those are raised keloid formations from repeated whippings that cut so deep they damage the tissue permanently. Gordon's back looks like a topographical map of pain, each ridge representing a separate beating, a separate act of torture inflicted by his enslaver. This photograph was taken in Baton Rouge after Gordon escaped and made it to Union lines. He had walked miles through swamps, evading dogs and slave catchers, all while his back was still healing from his most recent whipping. The photographer who took this image sent copies to abolitionists in the North, and it was published in Harper's Weekly, shocking Americans who had never seen the physical reality of slavery. But here's what gets me. This wasn't unusual. Gordon's back wasn't exceptional. Thousands of enslaved people bore similar scars. The only difference is that Gordon's suffering was photographed and preserved. How many others endured the same torture but left no photographic evidence? How many backs were destroyed? How many bodies were broken? And we'll never know their names or see their scars. Number 19. Slave children in New Orleans. This photograph from 1863, held in the Library of Congress, shows enslaved children in New Orleans who were photographed to raise money for schools for freed slaves. These children, some as young as 5 or 6 years old, stare into the camera with expressions that reveal the trauma they've already experienced. What's particularly disturbing about this image is that these children appear white or very light-skinned. They were photographed specifically to show Northern audiences that enslaved people who looked white were still being held in bondage, challenging the racist assumption that slavery was acceptable because enslaved people were visibly different. These children were the products of rape, white slaveholders, sexually assaulting enslaved women and then enslaving their own biological children. The one-drop rule meant that any African ancestry, no matter how distant, made a person legally black and therefore enslavable. These children could have white fathers, white grandparents, and still be bought and sold like property. Look at their faces. These are children who should be playing, learning, growing up safe. Instead, they're property, commodities, things to be owned. And the fact that they look white didn't protect them, didn't save them, didn't make white society see them as human. That's how deep the evil of slavery went. Number 18. Lynching of Thomas Shipp and Abram Smith. This photograph from August 7, 1930, archived in the National Archives, shows the lynching of Thomas Shipp and Abram Smith in Marion, Indiana. But what makes this image truly horrifying isn't just the bodies hanging from the tree. It's the crowd of white people gathered below, smiling, pointing, celebrating. Look at those faces. Men in suits and hats, women in dresses, even children, all gathered to watch two black men be murdered. They're not horrified or ashamed. They're entertained. This was a social event, a community gathering, a spectacle that white people attended like it was a carnival. Lynchings weren't secret acts committed by a few extremists. They were public events, advertised in advance, attended by thousands. White people would bring their children, take photographs, and even collect souvenirs. Pieces of rope, clothing from the victims, sometimes even body parts. Postcards of lynchings were sold and mailed across the country. Between 1882 and 1968, over 4,700 black people were lynched in America. That's a conservative estimate. The real number is probably much higher. And for every lynching that was photographed and documented, how many others happened in the dark, in remote areas, with no witnesses except the murderers? Number 17. Emmett Till in his casket. This photograph from September 1955, published in Jet magazine, shows 14-year-old Emmett Till in his casket after being brutally murdered in Mississippi. His mother, Mamie Till Mobley, insisted on an open casket funeral so the world could see what had been done to her son. Emmett Till was beaten so severely that his face was unrecognizable. His eye was gouged out, his skull was crushed, and he was shot in the head before being thrown into a river with a 75-pound cotton gin fan tied around his neck with barbed wire. His crime? Allegedly whistling at a white woman. An accusation that the woman later admitted was false. Mamie Till Mobley's decision to show her son's mutilated body was an act of incredible courage. She wanted America to see the reality of racial violence, to confront what racism actually looked like. The photograph of Emmett in his casket was published in Jet magazine and seen by hundreds of thousands of people, galvanizing the civil rights movement. But here's what haunts me about this image. Emmett Till was a child. He was 14 years old, visiting relatives, probably excited to be on a trip, and white supremacy murdered him, tortured him, destroyed his body so completely that his own mother could barely recognize him, and the men who killed him were acquitted by an all-white jury, then later admitted to the murder in a magazine interview, knowing they couldn't be tried again. Number 16. Birmingham children attacked by police dogs. This photograph from May 1963, preserved in the Associated Press archives, shows police dogs attacking black children during civil rights protests in Birmingham, Alabama. The image captures a German shepherd lunging at a teenage boy while a police officer holds the leash. These weren't criminals or violent protesters. These were children, teenagers, participating in peaceful demonstrations for basic civil rights. And the response from white authorities was to unleash attack dogs on them, to use violence against children who were asking for nothing more than the right to be treated as human beings. Birmingham's Public Safety Commissioner, Bull Connor, ordered police to use dogs and fire hoses against protesters, including children as young as 6 years old. The water pressure from the fire hoses was strong enough to tear bark off trees and rip clothing off bodies. Children were slammed against walls, knocked down, and injured by the force of the water. These images, broadcast on television and published in newspapers worldwide, shocked the nation and the world. They showed the brutality of segregation in stark, undeniable terms. But what gets me is that this happened in 1963, not 1863. This was during the lifetime of people who are still alive today. This isn't ancient history. This is recent history. And the greedy, people who ordered these attacks, who unleashed dogs on children, many of them lived long lives and died peacefully, never facing justice. Number 15. The Tulsa Race Massacre. This photograph from June 1921, held in the Tulsa Historical Society archives, shows the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, known as Black Wall Street, burning during the race massacre that destroyed one of the most prosperous black communities in America. Black Wall Street was a thriving business district with black-owned banks, hotels, stores, restaurants, and professional offices. It was proof that black people could build wealth and success when given the opportunity, and white Tulsa couldn't stand it. On May 31st and June 1st, 1921, white mobs attacked Greenwood, burning over 35 blocks, destroying over 1,200 homes and businesses, and killing an estimated 300 black residents. White men used airplanes to drop firebombs on black neighborhoods. This was one of the first aerial bombings of an American city, and it was Americans bombing other Americans because of race. The massacre was erased from history for decades. It wasn't taught in Oklahoma schools, wasn't mentioned in history books, wasn't acknowledged by the state government. Survivors were threatened into silence, and the white mob members who participated in the massacre faced no consequences. The land where Black Wall Street stood was seized and never returned to its rightful owners. Number 14. Slave Auction Block. This photograph from 1861, archived in the Library of Congress, shows a slave auction block in Virginia where human beings were bought and sold like livestock. The stone platform where enslaved people stood while being auctioned still exists in some southern cities, a permanent reminder of America's original sin. Imagine standing on that block. Imagine being stripped, examined, prodded, having your teeth checked like a horse, your muscles felt, your body evaluated for its capacity to work and to breed. Imagine watching your children sold to one buyer, your spouse sold to another, knowing you'll never see them again. Slave auctions were regular events in southern cities. Families were deliberately separated to break their spirits and prevent resistance. Children were sold away from mothers, husbands separated from wives, siblings scattered across different plantations. The psychological torture of family separation was a deliberate strategy to maintain control. And here's what really gets me. These auction blocks still exist. You can visit them today in cities like Fredericksburg, Virginia, and St. Augustine, Florida. They're historical markers now, tourist attractions, but they're also crime scenes, places where unspeakable evil occurred, where human beings were commodified and families were destroyed. Number 13. Convict leasing in Florida. This photograph from 1909, preserved in the Florida State Archives, shows black convicts in chains, forced to work on road construction. After slavery was officially abolished, Southern states used convict leasing to maintain a system of forced black labor. Black men were arrested for minor offenses or completely fabricated charges: vagrancy, loitering, not having a job, talking back to a white person. Once convicted, they were leased to private companies, who worked them under conditions that were often worse than slavery. At least enslaved people had value to their owners and were kept alive. Convict laborers were expendable. If they died, the company just leased more. Thousands of black men died in convict labor camps from overwork, malnutrition, disease, and violence. They worked in mines, on railroads, in lumber camps, and on chain gangs building roads. The mortality rate was staggering. In some camps, over 40% of convict laborers died within a year. This system continued well into the 20th century. Some southern states didn't end convict leasing until the 1940s. And the legacy continues today in the prison industrial complex, where incarcerated people, disproportionately black, are still forced to work for pennies per hour. Number 12. Little Rock 9. This photograph from September 1957, held in the Library of Congress, shows Elizabeth Eckford, one of the Little Rock Nine, walking to school while being screamed at by an angry white mob. Behind her, a white woman's face is twisted in rage, mouth open in a scream of hatred. Elizabeth Eckford was 15 years old. She was trying to go to school. That's it. She wanted an education. And white adults screamed at her, threatened her, tried to prevent her from entering the building. The Arkansas National Guard, ordered by the governor, blocked the black students from entering. It took federal troops to protect 9 black teenagers so they could attend school. Look at Elizabeth's face in this photograph. She's composed, dignified, walking with her head up despite the hatred surrounding her. She's wearing a nice dress, carrying her books, trying to maintain her dignity while adults scream racial slurs at her. The courage it took to walk through that mob is unimaginable. The Little Rock Nine endured a year of harassment, violence, and threats. White students pushed them downstairs, threw acid in their faces, burned them with hot soup, and when the school year ended, the governor closed all Little Rock high schools for an entire year rather than allow integration to continue. Number 11. Birmingham Church bombing victims. This photograph, from September 1963, archived in the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, shows the aftermath of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing that killed 4 young black girls: Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Carol Denise McNair. These girls were at church on a Sunday morning, attending Sunday school, getting ready for worship service. They were in the basement bathroom when Ku Klux Klan members planted a bomb that exploded, killing all 4 girls and injuring 22 others. The youngest victim, Denise McNair, was 11 years old. The others were 14. They were children, in church, and white supremacists murdered them with a bomb. And the response from white Birmingham? Many white residents blamed the civil rights movement for provoking the violence, rather than condemning the murderers. It took decades for the bombers to face justice. One wasn't convicted until 2001, 38 years after the murders. Another died before he could be tried. The FBI had identified the suspects within days of the bombing, but didn't prosecute because J. Edgar Hoover blocked the case. Number 10. Slave children working. This photograph from 1913, held in the National Archives, shows black children working in cotton fields in the South, decades after slavery was supposedly abolished. Child labor was rampant in the South, with black children forced to work instead of attending school. These children should have been in classrooms, learning to read and write, preparing for their futures. Instead, they were in fields, doing back-breaking labor for pennies or nothing at all. Many black children in the South didn't attend school regularly because they were needed for farm work, perpetuating a cycle of poverty and limited opportunity. The sharecropping system that replaced slavery kept black families in debt and dependent on white landowners. Children had to work to help their families survive. Education was a luxury that many black families couldn't afford, not because they didn't value it, but because the economic system was designed to keep them trapped. This photograph was taken 50 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. 50 years, and black children were still working in fields, still denied education, still trapped in a system that exploited their labor and limited their futures. Number 9. Selma Bloody Sunday. This photograph from March 7, 1965, preserved in the Associated Press archives, shows Alabama state troopers beating civil rights marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. The marchers were peacefully protesting for voting rights when they were attacked with billy clubs and tear gas. John Lewis, who would later become a congressman, had his skull fractured by a state trooper's baton. Amelia Boynton was beaten unconscious and left for dead on the bridge. Dozens of marchers were hospitalized with injuries from the police attack. They were exercising their constitutional right to protest, and the response was state-sanctioned violence. The images from Bloody Sunday, broadcast on television, shocked the nation and helped build support for the Voting Rights Act. But what haunts me is that this happened in 1965. People who participated in this march are still alive today. The troopers who beat them, many of them lived long lives without facing consequences. And now, decades later, the Voting Rights Act that was won with blood on that bridge is being systematically dismantled. The protections that John Lewis and others fought for, that they were beaten for, are being stripped away. Their sacrifices being erased. Number 8. James Meredith shot. This photograph from June 6, 1966, archived in the Library of Congress, shows James Meredith lying on the ground after being shot during his March Against Fear in Mississippi. Meredith was walking from Memphis to Jackson to encourage black voter registration when a white supremacist shot him. Meredith survived, but the image of him lying wounded on the highway, shot for encouraging black people to vote, shows the violence that black Americans faced for simply trying to exercise their rights. This wasn't the Deep South in the 19th century. This was 1966, less than 60 years ago. After Meredith was shot, other civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr. and Stokely Carmichael, continued the march. Thousands joined them, and the march became a major moment in the civil rights movement. But the fact that it took a shooting to galvanize that response shows how normalized violence against black people had become. Number 7. Negro Motorist Green Book. This photograph from 1949, held in the Schomburg Center archives, shows a copy of the Negro Motorist Green Book, a travel guide that listed safe places for black travelers to eat, sleep, and get gas while traveling through America. The existence of this book is disturbing because it shows that black people couldn't travel freely in their own country. They needed a guidebook to avoid towns where they might be killed, to find hotels that would accept them, to towns about buck, locate gas stations that would serve them. Traveling while black was literally dangerous. The Green Book was published from 1936 to 1966, documenting 3 decades when black Americans needed a survival guide just to drive across the country. Sundown towns, where black people had to leave before sunset or face violence, were common across America, not just in the South. This book represents the daily humiliation and danger that black people faced. Every trip required planning. Every stop was potentially dangerous. Every interaction with white people could turn violent. And this was during the lifetime of people who are still alive today. Number 6. Police brutality in the 60s. This photograph from 1963, preserved in the National Archives, shows police officers in Birmingham using fire hoses on civil rights protesters. The water pressure was so strong it could strip bark off trees and tear clothing off bodies. Children were knocked down by the force of the water, slammed against buildings, injured by the pressure. And the police didn't care. They were following orders from Bull Connor, who wanted to crush the civil rights movement through violence and intimidation. These images were broadcast worldwide, showing America's racism to the entire planet. Foreign governments condemned the United States for its treatment of black citizens. The Soviet Union used these images in propaganda, pointing out American hypocrisy in claiming to be the land of freedom while treating black people like this. But what gets me is that the police officers who did this, who turned fire hoses on children, who unleashed dogs on peaceful protesters, they went home to their families that night. They probably thought they were doing their jobs, protecting their community. They didn't see themselves as evil. That's how normalized racism was. Number 5. Medgar Evers crime scene. This photograph from June 12, 1963, held in the Mississippi Department of Archives, shows the crime scene where Medgar Evers, NAACP field secretary, was assassinated in his own driveway. He was shot in the back by a white supremacist while his wife and children were inside the house. Evers had been organizing voter registration drives, investigating murders of black people, and fighting segregation in Mississippi. He received constant death threats, but he continued his work because he believed in justice and equality. And white supremacy murdered him for it. His assassin, Byron de la Beckwith, was tried twice in 1964, but all white juries refused to convict him despite overwhelming evidence. He walked free and lived openly in Mississippi for decades, even running for political office. He wasn't convicted until 1994, 30 years after the murder. Medgar Evers was 37 years old when he was killed. He had 3 young children who heard the gunshot that killed their father. His wife, Merle, found him bleeding in the driveway. And the man who murdered him lived free for 3 decades, protected by a racist system that valued white supremacy over justice. Number 4. Fred Hampton crime scene. This photograph from December 4, 1969, archived in the Chicago History Museum, shows the blood-stained mattress where Fred Hampton, chairman of the Illinois Black Panther Party, was murdered by police while he slept. Hampton was 21 years old. Chicago police, working with the FBI, raided Hampton's apartment at 4:30 in the morning and shot him while he was in bed, likely drugged by an FBI informant who had slipped him a sedative. Police fired over 90 shots into the apartment. Hampton was shot twice in the head at point-blank range while he slept. The police claimed they were fired upon first and acted in self-defense, but forensic evidence showed that only 1 shot came from inside the apartment, and it was likely fired after Hampton was already dead. The raid was an assassination, planned and executed by law enforcement. Hampton was a brilliant organizer who was building coalitions across racial lines, creating free breakfast programs for children, and organizing community health clinics. He was a threat to the establishment not because he was violent, but because he was effective. So, they killed him. Number 3. Rosewood Massacre. This photograph from January 1923, held in the Florida State Archives, shows the ruins of Rosewood, Florida, a prosperous black town that was completely destroyed by a white mob. Over 150 black residents were killed, and the entire town was burned to the ground. The massacre started with a false accusation. A white woman claimed she had been assaulted by a black man. White mobs from surrounding areas descended on Rosewood, hunting for black residents, burning homes and businesses, and killing anyone they found. Black residents fled into the swamps, hiding for days while white mobs hunted them. The town of Rosewood ceased to exist. Every building was destroyed, every resident was killed or driven away, and the land was left empty. For decades, the massacre was covered up, not taught in schools, not acknowledged by the state. Survivors were threatened into silence. It wasn't until 1994, 71 years later, that Florida officially acknowledged the massacre and provided compensation to survivors and their descendants. But no one was ever prosecuted for the murders. The white mob members who participated in the massacre lived their lives freely, never facing justice. Number 2. Elaine Massacre. This photograph from October 1919, preserved in the National Archives, shows the aftermath of the Elaine Massacre in Arkansas, where white mobs and federal troops killed an estimated 100 to 240 black sharecroppers who were organizing for better wages. Black sharecroppers had formed a union to demand fair payment for their cotton. White landowners couldn't tolerate black people organizing for their rights, so they attacked. White mobs, joined by federal troops, hunted black people through the countryside, killing men, women, and children. After the massacre, over 200 black people were arrested and charged with inciting violence. 12 were sentenced to death, not for killing anyone, but for daring to organize for fair wages. The white mob members who actually committed the murders faced no charges. The Elaine Massacre was one of the deadliest racial massacres in American history, but it's barely known today. It was covered up, erased from history, not taught in schools. The black people who were murdered were blamed for their own deaths, accused of starting a riot when they were actually the victims of a massacre. Number 1. Strange fruit. Lynching photographs. This photograph from the early 1900s, held in various archives, shows the aftermath of a lynching, with black bodies hanging from trees while white crowds gathered below. These images, which inspired Billie Holiday's haunting song Strange Fruit, represent the thousands of lynchings that terrorized black communities for decades. Lynchings weren't just murders, they were public spectacles designed to terrorize entire communities. White people would gather by the thousands, bringing their children, taking photographs, collecting souvenirs. Body parts of lynching victims were kept as trophies. Photographs were made into postcards and mailed across the country. Between 1882 and 1968, over 4,700 documented lynchings occurred in America. The real number is certainly higher, as many lynchings went unreported or were covered up. Black people were lynched for alleged crimes, for economic success, for talking back to white people, or for no reason at all, except white supremacy's need to maintain control through terror. What makes these photographs so disturbing isn't just the bodies hanging from trees. It's the faces of the white people in the crowds. They're smiling, laughing, posing for the camera. They brought their children to watch human beings be tortured and murdered. They saw nothing wrong with what they were doing. That's how deeply racism was embedded in American culture. These photographs exist because the murderers were proud of what they did. They wanted documentation, wanted to remember, wanted to share their participation in racial terror. They had no fear of consequences because they knew the law wouldn't touch them, that white society would protect them, that their actions were sanctioned by the culture they lived in. Now let me tell you why these images matter, why we need to look at them even though they're painful, even though they're disturbing, even though they make us want to look away. These photographs are proof. They're evidence that can't be denied, documentation that can't be dismissed. When people say racism wasn't that bad, when they minimize the horrors of our history, these images tell the truth. Every photograph I showed you represents real people who suffered, real families that were destroyed, real communities that were terrorized. These aren't abstract historical events. These are crimes against humanity, documented in photographs that the perpetrators took themselves because they were proud of their evil. And here's what really gets me. Many of the people who committed these atrocities, who participated in lynchings and massacres and police brutality, they lived long lives. They raised families, went to church, were respected members of their communities. They never faced justice, never paid for their crimes, never even acknowledged that what they did was wrong. Meanwhile, the trauma they inflicted echoes through generations. The wealth they destroyed was never recovered. The families they separated never reunited. The psychological damage they caused still affects black communities today. This isn't ancient history. This is living history, and we're still dealing with its consequences. But we're also the descendants of survivors, of people who endured unimaginable horror and kept going, who maintained their humanity in the face of dehumanization, who fought for justice, even when justice seemed impossible. Every person in these photographs who survived, who resisted, who refused to be broken, they're our ancestors, and their strength lives in us. We remember them, we honor them, and we continue their fight. That's our inheritance, and nobody can take it from us.